In 2018, rescuers walked out of Tham Luang with 12 boys and their coach alive. The cave had almost killed them. Then, the entrance became something else. A place of rescue, a place of pilgrimage, a place officials had to close, reopen, limit, and explain, because the world had learned its name in the worst possible way. That is the strange thing about sealed caves. Most are not sealed by stone forever. Some are sealed by microbes, some by heat, some by law, some by politics, some by the simple fact that letting people in would destroy the thing they came to see. This list is not about 10 identical locked doors. It is about 10 different reasons a discovery becomes too fragile, too dangerous, too sacred, or too disputed to leave open. And one entry near the end is different. It is not a confirmed cave at all. It is a rumor built around real nuclear tunnels in Nevada, and the honest version of that story is better than pretending the rumor is fact. The deeper we go, the less the title means sealed forever in a simple way. It begins with a cave that humans almost loved to death. Keep that phrase in mind, because several caves on this list were not sealed when they were empty. They were sealed after they proved too valuable. That changes the moral shape of the story. A sealed cave can feel like a secret being kept from the public. Sometimes it is, but sometimes the public is the danger. The deeper pattern is exposure. A cave can survive because air does not move, because humidity stays stable, because bacteria never arrive, because no boot ever crushes the sediment. Discovery breaks that arrangement. It gives the place a name, a map, and a line of people waiting to enter. The lock comes later, when someone realizes the door should never have stayed open. Number 10 is Lascaux, France. Lascaux was discovered in September 1940 near Montignac in southwestern France. The familiar story begins with 4 teenagers and a dog named Rewrote, then opens into one of the most important decorated caves ever found. Inside were painted animals, signs, and figures from the Upper Paleolithic, commonly dated to around 17,000 years ago. After the Second World War, the cave became a public wonder. It opened to visitors in 1948. People came in large numbers. They breathed, sweated, brought light, changed airflow, and altered a system that had preserved the paintings for millennia. By the 1950s, damage had become visible. Carbon dioxide, humidity, temperature changes, algae, lichens, and later fungal outbreaks threatened the walls. In 1963, the original cave was closed to the public. That closure did not end the story. It began the conservation problem. Lascaux now exists in layers. There is the original cave, restricted to specialists and monitoring. There are replicas, including Lascaux 2 and Lascaux 4, built so visitors can experience the images without entering the real chamber. There is also the uncomfortable fact that even conservation work can create new problems. Air systems, treatments, and human intervention have sometimes been implicated in microbial outbreaks. The cave is not sealed because its mystery vanished. It is sealed because the paintings survived ice ages better than they survived tourism. Lascaux teaches the first rule: discovery can be an injury. A place may be hidden for thousands of years, and then the first crowd can become the most dangerous event in its modern history. There is an almost unbearable irony in the replicas. They are signs of success and failure at the same time. Success because the public can still encounter the images. Failure because the encounter has to happen beside the real cave, not inside it. The replica becomes the ethical compromise. People get the wonder. The original gets distance. And distance, in Lascaux, is now part of the conservation system. The cave did not need to be forgotten. It needed to be protected from being experienced directly. That idea is harder than it sounds. Heritage usually asks to be seen. Museums preserve objects by displaying them under controlled conditions. Lascaux forced a different model: preservation through absence. The real walls remain out of reach, while the public version becomes an artifact in its own right. The copy became the entrance. That is why Lascaux still feels unsettling. The most famous thing about it can be visited, photographed, and sold on postcards, while the actual cave stays behind conservation protocols. The viewer receives a near-perfect experience and still misses the original by design. Number 9 is Movile Cave, Romania. Movile Cave was discovered in 1986 near Mangalia, close to the Black Sea. It had been sealed from the surface for an estimated 5.5 million years. When scientists entered, they did not find a normal cave environment. They found a low-oxygen, sulfur-rich, toxic world supporting life without sunlight. The ecosystem is based on chemosynthesis. Bacteria use chemical energy, including compounds linked to hydrogen sulfide and methane, to support a food web. Researchers have identified cave-adapted invertebrates, many of them endemic, living in darkness, humidity, and air that would be dangerous for ordinary visitors. Movile is not sealed because people are trying to hide it. It is sealed because its isolation is the experiment. Access is strictly limited to researchers. That matters. One careless opening could introduce organisms, change airflow, disturb humidity, or contaminate a biological system that developed without the surface world. Even the ladder and the artificial shaft are not neutral. They are intrusions into a separate planet. The mystery here is not whether life exists, it does. The mystery is how far life can separate from sunlight and still build a working ecosystem. Movile also forces a different kind of humility. Lascaux protects ancient human images. Movile protects non-human adaptation. The value is not art, but survival in conditions that feel almost hostile to the idea of life. If Lascaux was sealed after people changed it, Movile was sealed before people arrived. The most unsettling detail is the atmosphere. Reports describe low oxygen and elevated carbon dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, and methane. Those are not decorations in a mystery story. They are the chemical basis of the cave's ecology, and the reason careless entry would be dangerous. Movile is a living laboratory that also happens to be poisonous. That creates a narrow kind of permission. Scientists may enter because controlled study can protect knowledge. Tourists cannot enter because curiosity would add disturbance. In this case, the seal is not a denial of science. It is the condition that allows science to continue. Movile also changes the meaning of contamination. In an ordinary room, contamination might mean dirt. In Movile, outside microbes, oxygen shifts, equipment residue, or changes in carbon dioxide could affect an ecosystem that developed under chemical rules unlike the surface. A human visit is not a neutral observation. The animals there are not large cinematic creatures. Many are small invertebrates adapted to darkness. That makes them easier to overlook and easier to damage. A cave does not have to contain a giant animal to deserve a locked entrance. Sometimes the smallest life is the strongest reason to close the door. Number 8 is Ellora Cave, 29, India. Ellora is a UNESCO World Heritage Site in Maharashtra, one of the world's great rock-cut complexes. The site includes Buddhist, Hindu, and Jain monuments carved into basalt between roughly the 6th and 10th centuries. Cave 29, also called Duma Lena, belongs to the early Hindu group and is generally understood as a Shiva temple. So the first correction is important. Cave 29 was not simply discovered and sealed forever. It is not an unknown chamber with no purpose. It is part of a studied monument complex. The mystery is more architectural than secret. Cave 29 is one of the largest early excavations at Ellora. Its design integrates the surrounding cliff and a natural waterfall known as Vale Ganga. Inside are large sculptural panels, a shrine, and forms associated with Shiva worship. The work was not built by stacking stone. It was excavated by removing stone that could never be put back. Rock-cut architecture always contains a strange, negative logic. A normal building rises from pieces added together. A cave temple emerges from everything that is taken away. Its seal is conservation, not disappearance. Ellora remains visited, studied, and managed. But parts of the complex face water seepage, weathering, crowd pressure, and the basic vulnerability of carved basalt exposed to centuries of monsoon cycles and human movement. That makes Cave 29 a different kind of entry. The purpose is not unknown in the way a lost civilization myth suggests. The unanswered part is how a workforce coordinated vision, labor, iconography, and geology at that scale without leaving a modern blueprint. The cave was not sealed forever. The method is what still feels sealed. That matters because Ellora is often used online as if it were an engineering riddle with no cultural context. But Cave 29 has a context. Shiva iconography, a shrine, sculptural panels, ritual movement, and the larger sacred landscape of Ellora. The mystery is not whether people had a purpose. They did. The honest mystery is execution. How many workers? How many years? How much planning before the first cut? How much correction after a mistake? Rock-cut architecture leaves final surfaces, but not always the decisions that produced them. In a normal ruin, fallen stones can reveal construction sequence. In Ellora, the absent stone is gone. The evidence is the void, and the void is disciplined. Cave 29 is not a rough shelter later decorated. It is a planned, sacred interior cut from a cliff, with sculptural programs and movement through space. The waterfall nearby adds another layer, especially during monsoon season, when water becomes part of the monument's sensory setting. That does not make the purpose unknown. It makes the process difficult to reconstruct. Modern visitors see the finished absence. The workers who made it had to imagine the finished absence before it existed. That is the sealed part of Ellora. Not a hidden chamber, a construction mind we can study only through the stone it removed. Number 7 is Cueva de los Cristales, Mexico. The Cave of the Crystals lies inside the Naica mine in Chihuahua, Mexico, about 300 meters underground. Miners discovered it in 2000 while working a tunnel. The chamber contained giant selenite crystals, some among the largest natural crystals ever documented. The numbers are difficult to picture. Crystals extended for meters across the chamber. The environment reached around 58 degrees Celsius, with humidity near saturation. Without special cooling suits and breathing systems, humans could remain inside only briefly before heat stress became life-threatening. This cave was not sealed by a door. It was sealed by the human body. Scientists entered with protective systems. The Naica project documented the crystals, studied their growth, and tried to understand how such forms developed. Research linked the crystals to groundwater chemistry, anhydrite dissolution, gypsum growth, and a temperature window held stable over vast periods. Some studies suggested the crystals grew at incredibly slow rates for hundreds of thousands of years. Then the mine changed. The cave had been accessible only because pumps kept groundwater out of the workings. When mining activity ceased and pumping stopped, the crystal chamber reflooded. That was not necessarily a loss for the crystals. Air exposure can damage them. The mineral-rich water that once allowed them to grow became their seal again. Naica is one of the rare cases where closure may be restoration. The cave became visible because industry drained it. It vanished again because the mine stopped holding back the underground world. For the researchers who entered, the clock was physical. Heat built inside protective suits. Breathing systems bought minutes, not hours. The crystals were enormous, but the human body remained the limiting instrument. That changes the emotional texture of the chamber. It is beautiful, but it is not welcoming. It does not want visitors in any ordinary sense. The cave's natural state is hot, wet, flooded, and dark. Human presence was a temporary error made possible by pumps and mining. The crystals were not waiting to be admired. They were growing in a sealed chemical machine. Number 6 is Hang Son Doong, Vietnam. Hang Son Doong lies in Phong Nha Ke Bang National Park in Vietnam. Local man Ho Khan found the entrance in the early 1990s, then lost the location for years. In 2009, he guided a British-Vietnamese expedition back to it, and the cave was confirmed as the largest known cave passage by volume. Son Doong is not sealed forever. Limited expeditions operate under permits. Oxalis Adventure is the authorized tourism operator, and access is tightly controlled by season, group size, safety rules, and conservation requirements.
The sealed part is more precise. Not every section is open to casual visitors, and the cave still contains risks, unknowns, and protected areas. Doong is large enough to contain its own weather-like effects. It has collapsed dolines, where jungle grows inside the cave, an underground river, enormous passages, and formations that make people reach for city-scale comparisons. The problem is that every comparison turns it into a theme park in the imagination. But the real cave is not built for crowds. It is remote, physically demanding, seasonally dangerous, and environmentally fragile. Heavy rain can change river conditions. Foot traffic can damage formations. Rescue inside a system of that scale would be complex. Tourism there is deliberately slow. The journey takes days, requires guides, porters, camps, river crossings, and technical supervision. It is not a roadside show cave with railings and floodlights. That distinction is the seal. Doong has become famous in photographs that make it look open to anyone with a plane ticket. In practice, the cave is filtered through permits, seasons, trained guides, conservation limits, and cost. That system can feel exclusionary, but the alternative is letting a fragile giant become another place damaged by its own fame. The mystery is not that authorities are hiding a secret chamber. The mystery is that Earth's largest known passage remained outside modern maps until the 21st century. After Lascaux, we know popularity can destroy. After Naica, we know access can depend on machines. Doong sits between those lessons, open enough to witness, restricted enough to survive. Number 5 is Denisova Cave, Altai. Denisova Cave sits in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. It is sometimes called the Den of Bones online, but the name that matters scientifically is Denisova. In 2008, a small finger bone fragment from the cave led to one of the most important human evolution discoveries of the last century. Genetic analysis published in 2010 showed that the individual belonged to a previously unknown archaic human population, now called Denisovans. The cave has also yielded evidence of Neanderthals, modern humans, and a child with one Neanderthal parent and one Denisovan parent. That means the cave did not just preserve bones, it preserved relationships. Denisova is not sealed forever in the literal sense. It is an active archaeological site, and the public access situation is not the same as Lascaux or Movile. The restriction is scientific. Sediments, layers, tiny bone fragments, artifacts, and ancient DNA all require controlled excavation. The cave's value depends on context. A bone removed without its layer loses part of its meaning. A disturbed sediment profile can erase chronology. Contamination can corrupt DNA work. In a site where a fragment smaller than a coin can rewrite human history, casual access becomes a threat. That is the reason Denisova belongs here, even though the phrase "sealed forever" exaggerates it. The real sealed chamber is the sediment record. Once destroyed, it cannot be reconstructed. What was found there changed the human family tree. What remains there may still change it again. The Denisovan discovery also changed how archaeologists value fragments. Before ancient DNA, a tiny bone splinter might seem almost mute beside a skull or complete skeleton. At Denisova, a finger bone and a tooth helped identify a population. The cave taught researchers that a human story can be smaller than it looks. Later methods pushed the idea further. Sediment DNA can reveal presence even when no obvious bone is recovered. That means cave dirt itself becomes an archive. The floor is not empty ground. It is a library of molecules, ash, tools, pollen, and broken animal remains. Once tourists walk through that archive casually, the pages blur. Number 4 is the Naica Mine System, Mexico. This is the second time Naica appears, and that seems wrong until you separate the chamber from the system.
The Cave of the Crystals is the famous room. The Naica mine is the industrial body that made access possible. Other cavities were found around the same mineral system, including the Cave of Swords, discovered earlier and at a shallower level, with smaller crystals. Later explorations documented additional crystal chambers and formations. The mine was not a tourist cave. It was a working lead, zinc, and silver mine, cutting through a hydrothermal system. The giant crystals existed because water, temperature, minerals, and time held the right conditions. Human access existed because mining pumps interrupted those conditions. That makes Naica one of the clearest examples of accidental discovery. Miners were not searching for a natural cathedral. They were trying to avoid flooding and continue work. Once pumping stopped, water returned. The sealed state is more than a safety closure. It is the system reverting toward the chemistry that created the crystals. Scientists who studied Naica were facing two forms of damage. Air could degrade the crystals, human heat and presence could affect the chamber. But without the mine infrastructure, people could not safely reach it at all. So the question becomes uncomfortable. Was the cave more protected when it was inaccessible, or when scientists could enter long enough to document it? Naica's answer may be both. The mine opened the door, the water closed it. The crystals remain where they formed, behind heat, depth, and a flooded industrial wound. That is why the repeated Naica entries are not redundant. Number 7 is the lethal room. Number 4 is the machinery that made the room visible. One is a natural chamber. The other is the industrial condition around it. Without the mine, people would likely never have seen those crystals. With the mine, the crystals were exposed to an environment that could harm them. The discovery and the threat arrived through the same tunnel. The second Naica entry also lets the list slow down on a different question. What counts as preservation when the best condition for the cave is the condition that excludes everyone? In a museum, preservation means climate control and access management. In Naica, preservation may mean flooding. It may mean returning the chamber to darkness, heat, mineral water, and silence. That answer frustrates the human instinct to document everything again and again. The crystals do not care if the photographs are famous. They care about chemistry. And the next cave shows what happens when the seal is created not by minerals, but by a global rescue watched in real time. Number 3 is Tham Luang, Thailand. Tham Luang Nang Non is a cave system in northern Thailand's Chiang Rai province. On June 23, 2018, 12 members of the Wild Boars football team and their assistant coach entered the cave. Heavy rain flooded passages behind them. They were trapped inside for more than 2 weeks. The rescue became international. Thai Navy SEALs, British cave divers, Australian specialists, and other rescuers worked through flooded, narrow, dangerous passages. Former Thai Navy SEAL Saman Kunan died during the operation. Between July 8th and July 10th, all 13 trapped people were brought out alive. The cave had become a machine for risk. After the rescue, Tham Luang and the surrounding park were closed. Officials discussed safety, memorialization, tourism, and the need to prevent the site from becoming another disaster. The cave later reopened in phases. The entrance area and early chambers became accessible under controlled conditions. Limited tours eventually reached Chamber 3, the rescue operation hub. Areas deeper than that remained restricted. So the common claim is outdated if it says Tham Luang was sealed forever. It was closed, transformed, and partially reopened. That does not make the closure meaningless. It changed the cave's identity. The bicycles left by the boys became part of the public memory. Equipment and rescue narratives became exhibits. A natural cave became a site of national trauma and survival. Tham Luang is the cold open because it is the clearest modern example of discovery through catastrophe. The world did not learn the cave because of geology. It learned the cave because children were missing inside it. The seal now is selective. Visitors may enter the story, but not the full danger. That selectivity is the point. Tham Luang had to become public enough to honor the rescue and private enough to prevent imitation. Officials faced a problem no cave manager wants. The tragedy made the cave famous, and fame creates visitors. People do not always visit a dangerous place to understand it. Sometimes they visit to stand where the danger happened. The phased reopening tries to manage that impulse. Early chambers can be interpreted. Chamber 3 can be shown under guide control. Deeper sections remain off limits because memory does not make hydrology safer. The cave is still the same cave. The water table does not care that the story has an ending. There is one more uncomfortable detail. Tham Luang's rescue succeeded because specialists treated the cave as an adversary with rules. They mapped time, oxygen, water, distance, sedation, diving intervals, and human panic. A tourist story can flatten that into inspiration. The cave itself never became inspirational. It remained wet limestone with seasonal flood behavior. That is why the remaining closure matters. It keeps the rescue from becoming an invitation. Number 2 is the Cave of the Cristals nuclear chamber, Nevada. This is the entry that fails the fact check. There is no reliable public evidence for a confirmed cave called the Cave of the Cristals nuclear chamber in Nevada. The phrase appears to blend several real things: Naica's Cave of the Crystals, the secrecy of the Nevada test site, and rumors about underground facilities in places such as Area 52. The Nevada National Security Site is real. It began as the Nevada test site in the early Cold War. The United States conducted hundreds of nuclear tests there, including many underground tests. Underground nuclear explosions can create cavities, tunnels, collapsed chimneys, and contaminated zones. The site remains restricted, active, and controlled by federal security and safety rules. That is already enough. There were real tunnel complexes at places such as Rainier Mesa and Pahut Mesa. There are real records of underground testing. There are real radioactive hazards and classified or restricted operations. There are public tours of limited parts of the site, but not open wandering through tunnels and test cavities. The crystal nuclear chamber claim, however, rests on rumor. One widely circulated Nevada underground facility story involved allegations of a huge chamber created by a clean nuclear device under Pahut Mesa. Wired reported the claims in 2007, while also noting skepticism from military watchers and former workers. This is exactly why the sourced version matters. A weaker script would pretend the rumored crystal chamber is established. The stronger one says the rumor is unsupported, and then points to the real sealed underground world: nuclear test tunnels, cavities, contaminated geology, and a desert site where the ground itself was used as an experimental container. The mystery is not a glowing crystal cave under Nevada. The mystery is how much of the underground nuclear landscape remains inaccessible because the history is dangerous, technical, classified, or contaminated.
There is also a language problem. Underground nuclear tests created cavities, chimneys, tunnels, and collapse features, but those are not caves in the romantic sense. They are human-made voids produced by explosions and engineering. Some are documented, some details remain restricted. Some areas are unsafe because contamination and unstable ground are not folklore. The real sealed chamber is the archive. Maps, test data, boreholes, tunnel records, groundwater studies, security boundaries, and classified work all sit behind layers of access. Nevada does not need a fake crystal cave to be unnerving. It has a real subsurface history shaped by weapons. This entry matters because conspiracy stories often grow beside partial truth. There really is a restricted Nevada range. There really were underground nuclear tests. There really are tunnels, mesas, classified projects, and places visitors cannot freely inspect. A rumor only has to attach itself to that reality to feel plausible. But a sourced script has to draw the line. A claim about a crystal chamber made by a nuclear device is not established evidence. It is an allegation. A claim about underground nuclear testing at the Nevada site is documented history. The difference is not pedantic.
It is the whole point. If the cave is invented, the story becomes weaker. If the cave is false, but the test cavities are real, the story becomes about how secrecy turns geology into rumor. Number 1 is Hok Cave, Yemen. Hok Cave lies on Socotra, the island in the Arabian Sea famous for its isolation and endemic life. The cave entrance sits above the northeastern coast, visible from the sea but difficult to reach. Inside is a long limestone passage with high humidity, speleothems, and archaeological traces that connect Socotra to ancient Indian Ocean trade. In the early 2000s, researchers documented inscriptions and drawings deep inside the cave. The languages and scripts included Indian Brahmi, South Arabian, Ethiopian Ge'ez, Ancient Greek, Palmyrene, and Bactrian. The dates fall broadly in the first centuries of the Common Era. That collection turns a remote cave into a maritime archive. These were not random scratches by isolated people. The inscriptions point towards sailors, merchants, and travelers moving through an Indian Ocean network that connected Africa, Arabia, India, and the wider Hellenistic and Near Eastern worlds. Socotra was not the edge of the world for them. It was a stop in the middle of routes. The cave is often described online as closed, and the truth is more complicated. Hok is protected, difficult to access, and parts of it remain under archaeological study. Yemen's political instability and Socotra's logistical isolation also affect travel. But it is not sealed forever in the clean Lascaux sense. Visitors have reached it, and travel writers have described the hike and entrance. Its strongest seal is not a modern lock, it is context. Most of the inscriptions are short: names, origins, marks of presence. A person passed through, stood in darkness, and left a sign. The cave preserves those signs in a place where languages from distant coasts appear together on stone. Hok belongs at number 1 because it reverses the idea of a sealed cave. It was never isolated from the world in the way Movile was. It was connected to the world by sailors. Then the routes changed, the languages shifted, and the cave kept the evidence after the living network moved on. The inscriptions matter because they do not belong to one empire or one language community. Brahmi beside Greek, beside South Arabian, beside Ge'ez and Palmyrene, turns the cave into a contact zone. It is a guest book from a world where sailors crossed monsoon routes and left names in darkness. That is more haunting than an undeciphered curse. Most of the marks are ordinary human statements. Someone came from somewhere. Someone belonged to a trade network. Someone wanted presence to outlast departure. Then centuries passed, and the ordinary became archaeological. The cave also sits inside the larger problem of Socotra itself. The island is a UNESCO-listed natural wonder, politically part of Yemen and physically isolated in the Arabian Sea. Modern access has shifted with conflict, flights, administration, and security conditions. That makes Hok difficult to treat as either open or closed in a simple way. The door is geological, but it is also historical. It is logistical, political, linguistic, archaeological. A visitor may reach Socotra in 1 year and struggle the next. A researcher may read the scripts, but still depend on photographs, editions, and field reports, because returning is not simple. That is why Hok earns the final position. Lascaux shows a cave sealed to protect images from breath. Movile shows a cave sealed to protect life from contamination. Hok shows a cave whose deepest material is readable only if you can cross distance, politics, and languages that no longer belong to ordinary speech. The inscriptions are short, but they widen the cave. A name in Brahmi points east. A Greek mark points toward the Hellenistic world. A South Arabian inscription points back across the sea. The cave becomes a map without drawing one. And unlike a painted animal at Lascaux, a name is almost painfully direct. It says, "A person stood there." Then it refuses to tell us enough. That is the last kind of sealed cave. Not sealed from entry, but sealed from full interpretation. You can reach the wall, you can photograph the letters, you can translate some names. Still, the person behind the mark remains mostly gone. The cave gives proof of contact. It withholds the life. And that is why sealed caves keep returning in human stories. Every closed entrance suggests not emptiness, but a limit someone finally learned to respect.
The silence is the warning, and the warning is the door.
Lascaux closed because breath damaged art. Movile closed because outside air would contaminate an ecosystem. Naica closed because water returned. Tham Luang closed because rescue exposed danger. Nevada is restricted because the underground record is nuclear. Hock is different. It is sealed by distance, politics, and dead languages. A cave does not have to be buried to become unreachable. Sometimes the entrance stays open, and the key disappears from history.